Welcome back, everyone, to another deep dive. This time we're going to be looking at mice and going way beyond, the typical image we all have of them being, just a pest in our homes.
Definitely.
And I have a real mouse expert here to walk us through everything, so get ready because it's going to be pretty fascinating.
It is. Yeah, a lot of people think mice are very simple creatures, but they're really not.
So let's jump right in. When we talk about mice, what exactly are we talking about? Okay, is there some kind of scientific definition or is it kind of a loose term?
It's funny because the difference between mouse and rat, it's not really a scientific thing. It's
Mm.
actually more about size.
Mm.
Like the smaller rodents in a family, we usually call those mice.
Okay,
But then the bigger ones in that same family, we tend to call them rats.
makes sense.
But it's not really like an official taxonomy thing.
Yeah, it's more of a general categorization.
Yeah, like a rule of thumb.
Okay, so when we say mouse, we're not talking about just one specific animal, right?
Right. We're talking about a whole bunch of different species.
So like what are some examples of different kinds of mice?
Oh, wow. There are so many. You've got the deer mouse, which is super cute with those big eyes and white feet. And then there's the kangaroo mouse. It actually jumps around on its hind legs like a tiny kangaroo.
Oh, way.
Yeah. And get this, there are even some called flying mice.
Whoa, hold on, flying mice?
Yeah. They don't actually fly like birds, but they can glide through the air. And then you've got voles, people call them field mice, but they're actually in a different group of rodents.
Okay, so clearly I need to expand my idea of what a mouse can be. Now I'm really curious.
Mm.
Where do all these different mice fit in? Like evolutionarily? Where are they on the rodent family tree?
So most of the mice we think of are called murines.
Murines.
Yeah, and they're in the same family as rats. That's the murids.
Okay.
And that family also includes gerbils and a bunch of other, closely related rodents.
Wow, so it's a big family.
Yeah, it's a pretty big branch on the rodent family tree, and that tells you they've been very successful, adapting and spreading all over the world.
So these little guys are more than just, random scurriers.
Right.
They've got a whole history behind them.
Absolutely. And a big part of that success is their amazing adaptations. I mean, think about it. Mice are small. They're often prey for other animals.
Yeah, you don't really think of them as being,
Okay.
at the top of the food chain.
No, but they've managed to thrive in all sorts of environments. How do they do it?
That's what I want to know. Like,
Yeah.
what's their secret weapon?
Well, their eyesight isn't that great,
Okay.
but they make up for it with incredible hearing and a really strong sense of smell.
I can see how that would be important.
Oh, yeah. Those senses are critical.
Yeah.
They need them for finding food, obviously, and then
Yeah.
avoiding predators like owls and snakes and cats.
That makes sense.
And they use those senses to navigate, too.
Oh, right. So being able to smell and hear really well would help them get around.
Exactly. And their whiskers are super important for that, too.
Oh, yeah. Their whiskers.
They're like these little sensors,
Oh, yeah.
They can feel their way around, especially in the dark.
So for the nocturnal mice, that's got to be super helpful.
Oh, absolutely. They're like little nighttime explorers. And speaking of adapting and exploring, their burrowing behavior is really interesting. Some mice actually inherit specific burrow designs.
Inherit. So they're born knowing how to build a certain type of burrow.
Yeah, it's kind of like they inherit a blueprint for their home. Isn't that wild?
That is wild. So it's not just instinct. It's like they have this knowledge built into their genes.
Exactly. And, being able to build a good shelter, that's a huge advantage if you want to survive and have babies. It just goes to show how resourceful they are and how well they can adapt to all these different environments. And it's not just about, physical adaptations. Mice are actually surprisingly intelligent. They have all these complex behaviors.
Really? So they're not just running on instinct.
No, they're actually pretty smart. We're only just starting to understand, how much they can think and learn.
Wow, that's cool. So what kind of like smarts are we talking about?
Well, for example, did you know that mice can make facial expressions just like us?
Why, seriously? Like little mouse faces showing emotions.
Yeah. Scientists have been able to decode their expressions using this special technology called machine vision.
Machine vision.
Yeah. And they found that mice make different faces when they're feeling, pleasure or disgust or fear, even pain.
That's incredible. I never would have thought about a mouse, showing disgust on its face. It makes you realize that emotions, maybe they're not so unique to humans after all.
Exactly. It really challenges our assumptions about, intelligence and the animal world.
Definitely. And speaking of assumptions, what about the whole mice and cheese thing?
Oh, yeah, the classic stereotype.
Is it true? Do mice actually love cheese?
Well, it's mostly a myth.
Oh, really?
Yeah, mice are actually mostly herbivores.
Herbivores. So they eat plants.
Exactly, like fruits and grains, seeds, that kind of stuff.
So no big cheese parties in their little mouse holes.
Ah, not really, but they're not picky eaters either.
Can't imagine.
Especially in cities, they'll eat just about anything they can find. Crumbs, scraps, you name it.
True survivors.
Yeah.
So we've seen that mice are, way more complex than we usually give them credit for.
For sure.
But I'm curious, like, where do they fit in with us humans?
That's a good question. It's a complicated relationship, that's for sure.
Yeah, I bet.
On the one hand, mice are really important for scientific research.
Right. I've heard of lab mice.
Yeah, because their genes are so similar to ours. They're really helpful for studying diseases and developing new treatments.
Okay, but how exactly does that work?
Well, one of the most important tools is something called a knockout mouse.
A knockout mouse.
Yeah, it's basically a mouse where scientists can turn off specific genes, to see what those genes do. It's kind of like if you had this big, complicated electrical circuit,
Yeah.
and you could switch off individual lights to see, what each light is connected to.
Oh, that's a good way to think about it.
So by studying these knockout mice, scientists can learn about how our genes work and, what causes different diseases.
Wow. So it's like mice are helping us understand ourselves better.
Exactly. They're playing a really crucial role in medical research.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And what about mice outside the lab? I know some people keep them as pets.
Oh, yeah. Pet mice are getting more and more popular these days. They're actually very playful and social little creatures.
I wouldn't have thought of mice as being cuddly.
Well, they can actually bond with their owners.
Wow. So what do you need to take care of a pet mouse?
Well, it's not too difficult, but there are a few things you need to know. You need to have a special cage with good ventilation and the right kind of bedding. And, of course, you need to give them the right food to keep them healthy and happy.
So you got to do your research before you get a pet mouse.
Definitely.
So we've got lab mice, pet mice, but there's another side to this, right? Like we also see mice as pests.
That's true. We can't forget about that part.
Yeah, they can cause a lot of problems for farmers and, people's homes.
Right. They can damage crops and contaminate food and even spread diseases.
So that's why people try to get rid of them.
Unfortunately, yeah.
It's interesting how, we have this complicated relationship with mice. We appreciate them in some ways, but then in other ways we see them as a problem.
It's true. It all depends on, our own needs and perspectives.
And on that note, I've heard that mice are sometimes used as food for other animals.
Yeah, that's right. A lot of people feed mice to their pets, like snakes and owls and other carnivores.
Huh. I guess that makes sense, but it's not something I like to think about too much.
I know what you mean. It's not the most pleasant part of the ecosystem.
Definitely not.
Yeah.
And while we're on that topic, are there any cultures where humans eat mice?
It's not common, but there are actually some places where people consider mice a delicacy.
Really?
Yeah, like in parts of Zambia and Malawi, people eat mice, especially during certain seasons.
Wow. That's definitely not something I would have expected. It's a good reminder that, what we consider food, it really depends on our culture.
Exactly. Our relationship with mice is so multifaceted. They can be research subjects or beloved pets or food or pests. It's really fascinating.
It really is.
Yeah.
This whole conversation has been a real eye-opener. I'm never going to look at a mouse the same way again.
I'm glad to hear that. It makes you think about all the assumptions we make about, the animals we live with.
It's crazy to think, how our views on mice have changed over time. Like we've gone from seeing them as these nasty pests to, recognizing how important they are in research and even appreciating them as pets. I wonder, how they've been seen throughout history. Like, have they always had this, bad reputation?
That's a really interesting question. Actually, the way people have viewed mice, it's been pretty different across cultures and throughout time. Like in some cultures, mice have actually been seen as symbols of intelligence and resourcefulness, even good luck.
Really?
Yeah. For instance, in ancient China, the mouse was associated with wealth and prosperity.
That's so different from how we usually think of them.
I know, right? And in some Native American cultures, mice are seen as like tricksters and messengers. They play a big part in their stories and myths.
So our modern view of mice is just like one tiny piece of a much bigger picture.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It seems like there's always been this kind of, two-sided relationship with mice. Like, on the one hand, we recognize how clever and adaptable they are, but on the other hand, we're also kind of afraid of them, because they cause problems.
Yeah, that makes sense. And that sort of explains, why we interact with them in so many different ways. Like, through scientific research and pest control and even keeping them as pets.
Exactly. It's like this constant push and pull between us and mice.
Well, this deep dive has definitely changed how I see mice.
Mm.
I'm walking away with a whole new appreciation for these little guys. So as we wrap up, what's the one thing you'd want our listeners to remember about mice?
I think the most important takeaway is that mice are so much more than just pests or lab animals. They're complex, intelligent creatures with this amazing ability to adapt, and they've played all these different roles in human history and culture. I think they deserve our respect and understanding, even if we don't always want them in our homes.
Well said. I definitely started this episode with some, preconceived notions about mice,
Mm.
but now I'm just amazed by them. It just goes to show that, there's always something new to learn, even about the animals we think we know really well.
Absolutely. The natural world is full of surprises.
Hmm.
It's up to us to keep exploring and asking questions and appreciating all the incredible life around us.
I couldn't agree more. A huge thank you to you for sharing your expertise with us today. This has been such an incredible journey into the world of mice.
It was my pleasure.
And to all our listeners out there, we hope you enjoyed this deep dive as much as we did. The next time you see a mouse, take a second to think about its amazing life and all its incredible adaptations. You might be surprised by what you discover. Until next time, keep exploring and stay curious.